Okay, so today's topic is a loop. So there are circumstances in which you want to do the same thing over and over. By the way, you can download this PowerPoint slide, right, from our class website. So this is just an example. Let's say you want to print the same words 10 times. Well, actually it's not 10 times, let's say 100 times. Let's say 100 times, right? Then there are two options. The first option is use the print function 100 times, right? And another option is you can use a loop, because the loop can perform the same step over and over again. This is much simpler and efficient way, right? And there are two different kinds of a loop. The first type is a while loop, and another one is a for loop, right? So first, let's take a look at the these two options, right? Using a while loop, especially for the second options, we're going to use a while loop. So the first way is really use a print function 100 times. So for example, in the Python shell, right? So I'll just open new file, and then what I can do is print hi, print hi, right? And then print hi, copy. I'm gonna paste this. And how many times? I have to do this 100 times. Okay. So just assume that I use these print functions 100 times, then run module, and let's see, document, let's say group options Python file, yes, right? And now let's just use a loop, especially a while loop. So the second option is use a while loop, so loop. So I'll talk about this while loop in more detail later, but for now I'll just read this while loop. So first you initialize the count value, and typically the while is a keyword, so you just while, and then this is a condition, so you put the condition after while, the keyword. So first count is 1, which is less than 100, right? So then if as long as this is true, this two statement which belong to this while statement, these two statements will be executed over and over up to how many? Up to 100 times. So first it will print hi, right? And then this is, by the way, slash in the new line. Then maybe I really don't need a new line. So you print hi, and then your count, this old count, the count value at this point is 1, right? So 1 plus 1 becomes 2. So new count value becomes 2, and then goes to while loop. Is that 2 is less than 100? Yes. So print hi. So this statement will be, this two statement will be repeated over and over up to 100 times. Okay. So if I just use while loop to print high 100 times. Let's say count byte is 1. So this count is a variable name. You can use any variable name, right? You can use a C. So while count is less than or equal to 100, right? By the way, you must put the colon, because after while statement you may use the compound statement, right? So that's why you have to use the colon after while, just like if statement. Okay, so if you put a colon, it automatically, right, the cursor will automatically put the indentations, and then you can type the statement, right, which belongs to the while. So print and high, and then count equal to count plus 1, right? So let's just execute this statement, run. Okay, so as you can see, it will print. I mean, after print, 4 times, right? Due to this for print statement, then it's going to print high 100 times. So we'll just print 100 times. Okay. So just print 100 times. Okay, so print 100 times. So this is a loop. So the first, so we're gonna learn while loop, right? And then I'll cover for loop. So let's talk about while loop first. And the while loop is typically controlled by a variable. So this variable that is going to be used in this after while loop, right, is called a test variable, right? So let's see. Okay, so if you look at this slide, lecture slide, right? So usually we have a while loop, right? While loop. While loop is a keyword. And then typically you have a condition. Typically the condition is a Boolean conditions. Meaning this value is going to be either true or false. Right? So this is like either true or false. Right? And then this variable, right? This type of variable is called a test variable. So first, you have to initialize before you go to the while loop. You have to initialize this test variable, either 1 or 0, or it's really up to your need. But for example, in this specific case, the test variable is now initialized as 1. So if that 1 is, so then it's going to test these conditions. So the count 1, right, is less than 5. Yes, this becomes true, so it will print count, which is 1. So print 1. And then the count will be increment by 1. So my old count, which was 1, right? So 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. And then goes to while loop. I mean the while statement. And then I'll test. Is that counter is less than 5? Yes. So print count, and then it's 2, and etc. Okay. So in this slide, what you have to know is for the while loop, you first have like test variable, right? Test variable, and you initialize this test variable. So like you have test variables are equal to something, right? Then you have a while loop, and right after, then you have after while keyword, you have Boolean conditions. Right? And then you have colon. So you have a colon, right? And then you have some indentations, just like if statements. So every statement that belongs to this while statement, right? It begins with this indentation. So now you have to have some statement. And statement 2, right? And then in this statement, you have to have this test variable. You have to change this test variable. So, for example, test variable is incremented, right? So that, by the way, this Boolean conditions usually a test variable is in this Boolean conditions. So in this loop, we change this test variable in such a way that eventually the Boolean expressions, these Boolean conditions, right, becomes false, right? Then we'll exit out of this while loop. Okay, so the order of the execution is first initialize this test variable, right? And then it test Boolean conditions, right? And then execute this statement inside the while loop, right? Repeats until this Boolean condition becomes false, then it exits out of loop. So that's the order of the while loop. The order of the executions when you use the while loop. Okay. So, by the way, the best way to learn a loop is basically you hand tracing. Is to hand tracing a loop. So the tracing a loop is the best way to learn like for example a while loop or the for loop. So let's just trace this loop. So we first have a test variable, right? The count is 1. And then while the count is less than or equal to 5, we'll print this counter, and then this counter will be incremented. By the way, this is called a test variable or the loop variable, right? It has two names. So to trace a loop, so first counter, we were going to follow the value of the counter. So for example, we have a counter, right? So we have a counter. And then this is like a loop. And then this is a loop number, right? So initially the count is 1, right? So we have a count variable, the count, and initially the value is 1. And is that 1 is, so this is a Boolean expressions, and in the Boolean expression usually a test or the loop variable is used, right? So 1 is less than 5, yes, which is true, right? Then there is indentations, and there is what? semicolon, right? So if this condition is true, as long as this condition is true, it will execute this statement. So execute this statement, and then it will print counter, which is 1, right? So just print 1. So at this point, so this is like a loop. So in the first loop, right? So in the first loop, the counter is, and then we'll increment counter by 1. So counter was a 1, so 1 plus 1, and then the counter becomes 2. Right? The counter becomes 2. So this is like loop number 1. And then this is, since this is end of statement, then this will goes to the while statement. And at this point, the counter is a 2, right? 2. So is it 2 is less than 5? Yes. So then we'll print this counter value. So we'll print 2. And then the counter will be incremented by 1. So 2 plus 1 is equal to 3. So in the second loop, loop number 2, counter value becomes 3. Right? And then in the third loop, since the 3 is less than 5, which is still true, we'll print 3, right? So we'll print 3. And then the counter will be incremented by 1. So loop number 3, the counter will be incremented by 1. And actually in the loop number 3 also what it does is print 3, print 2, then print 1, right? And then goes to the while statement, and then test this Boolean conditions. So counter is a 4. Is it 4 is less than 5? Yes. So print, so in the loop number 4, we'll first print what? We'll print 4. And then the counter will be incremented by 1, so which is 5. Right, sorry, it was 4 and now it's a 5, right? And then you go to loop number 5. So we'll go back to this while loop, these conditions, right? So the 5 is less than 5, which is true, right? And then so we'll print 5. So we'll print 5. And then the counter will be incremented by 1. So count now becomes 6. Now so count becomes 6. And then goes to this while loop. Is that 6 is less than or equal to 5? No, right? So not going to execute. So it's not going to execute this 2 statement, which belong to this while statement, while, right? So exit. So this is end of the while loop. So this is like end of the while loop. And then it will exit out of this loop, and then it's going to print the next the Python statement. So basically I will print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So as you can see, the tracing a loop is really the best way to learn while or the for loop. Okay, so let me end my lecture here.